the great pleasure of introducing my PI, Dr. Jennifer Garrison. In addition to being an incredible mentor, she's also the co-founder and director of the Global Consortium for Reproductive Longevity and Equality, and assistant professor at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging. She also holds appointments at UCSF and USC. As a passionate advocate for women's health, she is pioneering a new movement to advance science focused on female reproductive aging. Her lab studies the role of intertissue communication in systemic aging and how those changes in complex interactions between the ovary and brain during middle age lead to the onset of reproductive decline in females. She was named an Alfred P. Sloan Foundation Neuroscience Research Fellow and Allen Institute Brain Science Next Generation Leader, and is the recipient of the Glenn Foundation Award for Research in Biological Mechanisms of Aging and a Junior Faculty Award for the American Federation of Aging Research. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jennifer Garrison.
Thank you, Courtney. Can you hear me? Does this work? Awesome. That was really nice. And thank you all for being here. Thank you, Kristen and Longevity SF, for the opportunity to talk. I have to say this is the first time I've been in this auditorium since before the pandemic. And it's amazing just to be here with all these people. It feels incredible. So I'm going to talk today not about my work in the lab, although if you can find Courtney at the break, we're doing some really fun stuff, I think. But I want to talk about the reproductive longevity and equality initiatives that we've spearheaded at the Buck over the last few years. And hopefully by the end of my talk, you'll agree with me that ovaries are maybe the time machine we need for the longevity space to have something to test interventions in humans. So here we are at the Buck. Here are my disclosures, which are not really relevant for this talk. But thanks to basic science discoveries, we're all familiar with this graph. And I would say over the last decade or so, we've made really great strides in understanding that biological aging may be malleable, and that if we can understand what causes aging or what the mechanisms are that underlie aging, that maybe we could intervene there to reduce overall risk in terms of diseases of aging. And of course, our goal is to increase health span, not lifespan. And so when we look at this graph that everyone is familiar with, functional decline in organ systems during aging in humans, there's really a system that falls off this graph by a huge amount, and that is the female reproductive system. It really ages precociously. And this is what I want to talk about today. Now, there is aging in the male reproductive system. I'm not going to talk about that today, but it's much more synced up with aging in the rest of the tissues. And so we've chosen to focus on the female reproductive system for now. We'll get to the male reproductive system once we've solved that first problem. And of course, among humans, women do live longer than men. It's important to acknowledge that. On average, 8% longer than men, and this is true across the world. So for every single country where a lifespan has been measured, women live longer than men. However, they spend much more of their lives in a state of poor health. So this is for people who live to be at least 75. Women will spend an average of 34 years of their life in poor health, whereas men will spend about 26 years. That's a huge differential. And when you think about quality of life, things like osteoporosis, long COVID, Alzheimer's disease, these are all things that women suffer from much more than men. And of course, there are a lot of sex differences across biology, and I think it's really important just to say that as we're making strides in understanding reproductive health, it's really important to consider sex in your studies. So reproductive aging is going to impact every single female on the planet who is lucky enough to live to midlife. And ovaries are aging at about 2.5 times the rate of other tissues. And we think about them kind of like the canary in the coal mine for human aging. And so what this means in practice is that by the time a woman is in her early 30s, when most of her tissues are functioning at peak performance, her ovaries are already showing overt signs of aging, and by 35 are considered geriatric by the medical community. So that's really what we're looking to tackle. And this is something that I think a lot of people don't realize, is that all of the germ cells, all the eggs that a female human have, are made in utero. And so by the time a female fetus reaches about 26 weeks of age, that fetus will have a fully formed reproductive system, and all of the eggs, about 6 or 7 million that are ever going to be had. And so what that means in practice is that even though I was born in the 70s, the egg that I came from was made in my grandmother's womb in 1956. And this is something that becomes really important as we think about aging. So that number that I had when I was 26 weeks gestation had decreased to about 1 million by the time I was born. When I went through puberty, that number had decreased even further to about 300,000. Does that work? Oh, awesome. And then once I started cycling, I've been losing about 1,000 eggs per month with every single menstrual cycle. And when I run out of eggs, that is when I will go through menopause. And of course, it's not just the number of eggs that are declining in human females, but also the quality of eggs. And as women are delaying childbearing, of course, I think most people are familiar with the fact that this phenomenon leads to infertility, birth defects, things like that. But what's also important to recognize is that ovaries they're secreting hormones that are really important for overall health. So in addition to their effect on fertility, we can set aside fertility for a moment and just focus on what those hormones are doing in terms of overall health. So when they decline during the menopause transition, essentially what this does is it increases risk of developing a host of different diseases, including dementia, metabolic disorders, depression. Half of postmenopausal women will develop osteoporosis, which is more than double the rate in men. And menopause quadruples the risk for cardiovascular events. So there's just a whole host of things that happen to a woman's body after menopause that are traumatic and not experienced by men. So we think about this actually as an issue of equality. And I know that we typically talk about things like equality when we're discussing science. But on a societal level, every aspect of a female human's life, if she's lucky enough to live to midlife, is going to be influenced by the fact that her reproductive capacity is limited. And so overall health, career planning, family planning, all of these things, when I became an adult, every decision I made as an adult was influenced by this ticking biological clock in the background. And I do not have biological children yet. And put bluntly, menopause will make my body age faster, at least on the cellular level. Together made us think that we can think about ovaries and female reproductive aging as a target for aging interventions, for geroprotection in women. And there are things about this system that we really fundamentally don't understand. Really interesting, but don't understand them. So female reproductive span, the age at which a woman goes through menopause, is linked to her overall lifespan. So this is data from 9 different studies showing that age at menopause correlates with overall life expectancy in women. We do not understand why this is. It's a correlation. This is something that we actually need to really understand if we're going to solve reproductive aging. Maybe more importantly to the people in the audience who are not female, brothers of women who go through menopause later also tend to. Yeah. So there's a genetic component here that is important for every person on the planet. Beyond that, I think if we can understand what causes ovaries to age, that will give us clues about aging in the rest of the body. Because all of the pathways that we know about now that are important for aging, things like mTOR signaling, NAD metabolism, all of those things are also impacting in a way. And so I think it's fair to say that ovaries really are a canary in the coal mine for aging. We also don't understand why menopause happens at all. So humans are really bizarre in the animal kingdom. It's just us and a few species of whale, possibly one. And so it's not biologically necessary. It's not a biological imperative. And so why it happens in humans, what leads to it, these are all big open questions. And so the consequences are profound. We don't understand a lot of basic things about it, what sets it in motion, why reproductive span is so linked to lifespan. Also, why does it vary between individuals? I forgot to point out on that bar graph that I showed you a minute ago that if you were looking and paying attention to the x-axis, The average age of menopause for normal stands 14. So early menopause is before age 40. Late menopause is after age 54. There is no other signature in all of human health that is so variable. And if we could understand variability between individuals, I think that would take us a long way towards understanding those underlying mechanisms that we care about for intervening and extending health span in women. This is to say that this graph is an average, so we don't know where along this trajectory things go wrong. So we don't know where that causal factor or cue or constellation of cues and factors are that so reproducibly tell a woman's ovaries to start aging in her late 20s. And that is what we're trying to discover. At the level of the individual, I will say that this is not true. So reproductive biology is stochastic, it's complex, and we treat it that way. Older women go through periods of hyperfertility, young women can go through periods of infertility for no reason. And so when we're thinking about what's happening here, I think it's really important just to point out that this is one of the most robust but also most complex phenomena in all of biology. So when I talk about this to people, they're like, well, why don't we should already know this. Like these are simple questions. We should understand where along this trajectory things go wrong, but we don't. And I think this comes down to a couple of different factors. I'll just name a few here. One is that women's health has been treated, I think, as like a subcategory, a niche category of medicine for a very long time, even though it impacts half the population. And it's garnered about 1% of the research funding over the entire world and less than 2% of the biotech investment funding. That is changing, but I think this is really emblematic of that. So this is the 2018 NIH budget. This is the largest biomedical research funding in the US. And about 15% of this budget went to all of women's health from birth, from conception through death. And of that, 43 million, which is basically a rounding error, less than 0.2%, went to reproductive aging. Is it not working? Better?
Yes.
Nobody said anything. The systemic underfunding, like dramatic underfunding for women's health, and particularly for reproductive aging, but also the systemic sex bias in biomedical research. So it wasn't until 2016 that the NIH mandated that researchers who get grants from them have to include both males and females in their studies. And so before that, 80% of the funded research was completed only in male animals. So what that means is that we've been using the male body as biology's baseline, which is great for males, but has really left a hole in our knowledge around this basic science that we need to understand. And the reason for this, I think, is primarily because ovulatory cycles, the things that are so important for us to understand about female biology, were considered confounding variables. It turns out they're actually important. Beyond this, I think there's been, societal taboos around talking about women's health, talking about periods, talking about menopause, and that is also changing, which is amazing. So a few years ago, the Buck Institute launched what I would think of as a moonshot effort to try to tackle female reproductive aging. So we started a center, a consortium. I'll talk about both of them. And the center was founded in 2018 with a really generous donation from the Sergey Brin Family Foundation, and with foresight, I think, from them to understand that this was going to be a really important problem with respect to thinking about aging. And it's really the first facility in the world to focus solely on reproductive aging in women. So I'm a member of it. We have a couple of outside members, and then Eric and Dina Amira, who is she's actually an evolutionary biologist who just wrote a book about the evolution of the female form. Really fascinating. But the Buck Institute, third floor of Building 3, if you guys want to go over and visit it, you can actually see it. It's a physical intramural effort. We're doing it here. And when we founded it, we opened in 2019. Immediately, we realized that if we were going to do anything to really move the needle here, we had to do something bigger. And so that was to strengthen and broaden our reach. We founded a global consortium, and again, with a donation from the Bia Echo Foundation. And the goal here is really to expand the field, to set up an ecosystem that includes not just the scientists, but also the clinicians, because it turns out that this is an area of biology where if you don't have the clinical people talking to the basic researchers, things go very slowly, and sometimes not at all. So we're trying to build the ecosystem around this goal to bring together people from academia, from biotech, from the private sector, with the goal of basically pushing things forward faster. We want to take scientific discoveries and translate them more quickly into women's hands. And so we're trying to foster bold, innovative research. We've got 3 pieces to the consortium that I want you all to remember. The first one is funding. So we give away grants to basic scientists. And our goal here really is to generate the IP that will go towards building companies later on. Right now, I think the field is really at the beginning, and so there's not a lot of things going on that are translatable at this point. But we're trying to implement these kind of novel, innovative operating ideas as a way to break through the traditional ways that scientists have worked with everyone else. And we really need to engage an army of creative people to do this. So the other things I'll talk through a little bit on the next slides, and I'm happy to go through this in more detail later, but you don't have to read all of this. We, during the pandemic, opened a second center in Singapore, the Asia Center for Reproductive Longevity and Equality. And so they're doing some really cool stuff in Singapore, particularly around fertility and aging. We have tried to put together resources for our grantees and also for the community. So one of the things that we did is we thought, okay, we want to bring in as many creative people from outside of the field as possible to start to work on ovarian aging. There's so many mouse models, so many animal models that people will just throw away the ovaries. We want to get those people to think about them, or at least give them to us if they don't want to do anything with them. So we started a core facility here at Buck Institute called the Reproductive Biology Hub, which is doing, in some cases, fee-for-service experiments on ovarian tissue, human, rodents, and we can do non-human primate, although we haven't yet. But the goal really is to put together a team that can collaborate with someone who is not an expert in ovarian biology, bring them up to speed, and during non-COVID times, hopefully have boot camps where we can get trainees from labs to come here, learn all those techniques, and then take them back to their home labs as a way to lower the barrier to entry to people coming from outside the field. We gave away our first grants in August of 2020, so to 23 people all over the world. Simple application. I'm really proud of the work that's been done since it's only been 2 years, but in terms of what's happened with these grants. Our grantees were 18 women and 4 men, which was also really eye-opening. And these are some of the kinds of projects that we funded. Not a comprehensive list. You can go to our website if you're interested in looking at this. But the goal is to have a paradigm shift in how we think about aging research and to focus it through the lens of ovarian biology. We also organized the first international conference on reproductive aging in June. And so going from what was a handful of people really who were working at this interface between aging biology and reproductive biology to this was kind of amazing for me. And we'll be doing this every year, so the next one is coming up in April, early May. And the goal is really to bring in people from everywhere, from not just scientists and clinicians, but funders and people from private industry and biotech. And I think that having this kind of stimulating collaborations across disciplines and across the aisle in ways that we typically don't work together, I think this is how we'll move things forward faster. And I will just say that the narrative is changing. This is just from the last year, actually. There's a lot of discussion in the popular press about menopause, about female aging. I think that the societal taboos are falling, and it's really exciting. There are many companies that exist in this space. I won't go through all of them, but I will say that everything on this very partial list, these are all products and diagnostics. And that's really important. We need to redefine diagnostics, but funders are slowly waking up to the fact that this is a massive untapped market. It's a huge market, actually, if you just focus on menopause. I'm going to, in the interest of time, move through this a little bit more quickly. But we want to challenge the industry to rethink about women's health and reproductive longevity, and to think about not just treating the symptoms, which is what most of these companies are doing, but to look at the underlying causes. And I think until we have more scientific research and discoveries, there's only going to be a few companies that are doing this. So these are the ones that I know about that are working on interventions. You notice that there's far fewer than there were on the last slide. So that's why we focused all of our attention right now on funding grants. These are the kinds of questions we want to answer. Round 2 grant applications are open now. So we're giving away another $7 million. The applications will close on December 16th. 2 pages, really simple. We want the broadest group of people to apply. So if you know anyone who's interested, please tell them. And finally, we have a lot of initiatives that are going on that I didn't discuss, things like a biobank for discarded eggs to give human tissue to researchers who want to do this work. Thinking about network building, we have a lot of advocacy and things like that. And again, I'm happy to talk about this offline if anyone's interested. But I think we're in a historic moment in terms of the conversation around women's health, and I want to encourage everyone in this room to think about it, to get involved. We're trying to build out this network to include ambassadors as well who can spread the word about what we're doing, so I count you now all among our ambassadors. I have to thank Nick Gentry and Allison Rodriguez, who are the team that helped me with the consortium and who really manage the day-to-day operations and work incredibly hard to do all those things that I just showed on the last slide. And finally, if you want to support us, there it is. If you want to read about us, we have a white paper. And I would just say there's a real palpable energy around changing things in the space around women's health and reproductive aging, and I'm super excited about it. So. Charles. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things we're trying to do, one of the things that's evolved in terms of the consortium once we set up the granting and got that working, was that we've become kind of a bridge builder between the clinicians who have the patient populations and the data and the scientists who want to ask those questions. I'm sorry to say that the largest study that I know about in perimenopausal women of the type that you're describing is being collected by a private company. And that is because we've done a terrible job of getting the clinicians to collect that data in a way that is meaningful for research and also to connect them to people who could do something with that data. So yes, we do that all the time, and I think we're building out a database of the clinicians who have the data that want to work with scientists. And I will also say that there are large, UCSF, Columbia, Northwestern, there are these large-scale medical schools that have very big fertility clinics that are not profit-driven. Most of them are. The academic centers are not. And they do have these amazing data sets. And one of our grantees, Yushin Su, who's not here, but she is working with the Columbia docs there on a female aging center, actually. So yeah, it's happening. It's just slow. It's just unbelievably slow. Thank you.
Thank you.